Welcome to Your Idaho, brought to you by the Gem State Patriot. My name is Bob Neugebauer, and my guest today is Rod Beck. Rod Beck is running for representative in District 15. And we'd like to have Rod just tell you why he is running for office and what he wants to do if he gets into the legislature.
Well, thank you, Bob. It's good to be here with you with the Gem State Patriot and your organization. And I'd be happy to tell you why I'm running for the legislature and some of the things that I would like to accomplish once I get in. I am just disappointed in the way the legislature is being run, quite frankly. I'm disappointed that some of the things that they do, they seem to have the whole concept of self-government mixed up, because government is supposed to be, we the people are supposed to be telling the government what to do. And it seems as though our government is increasingly encroaching upon our rights, increasingly encroaching upon us, telling us what to do. And so I think there's a distinct difference in what I view as the proper role of government. I brought one of my campaign brochures here for you today.
I see that. I see that.
There is a distinct difference in what I view as a proper role of government and what others view as a proper role of government. And I'd like to implement more of a proper role of government in the state of Idaho.
Well, let's just talk a little bit about why the legislature is not doing what the people want. Do you feel the corporate lobbyists have really attached themselves to our legislators? Because that's kind of the way I've felt over the last 5 or 6 years, and they've basically taken control of what happens in our state.
I think there is undue influence. There's no question about it. In fact, unfortunately, in Idaho, if a Republican member of the legislature, this is how they raise money for their campaigns. They walk out to the mailbox. Oh, I've got a check from Monsanto. That's how they raise money. And of course, because they're getting big checks from the Idaho IACI and Monsanto and others, they have undue influence. No question about it. And it's even more pernicious than that, in my view, because Idaho law allows for gifts and anything of pecuniary value to be given to any public official. That would include county, city, the legislature, any state employee. And unless there's a specific promise to do something for that gift, it's not illegal.
So if you're a legislator and you and I had talked behind the scenes about some particular issue that you kind of agreed upon with me or came close to, and I said, hey, here's $1,000 for your campaign, and if you need some more, let me know. And there's nothing attached to this, but you remember our conversation of 2 weeks ago.
Exactly. That's not illegal. In fact, that's fully legal, and I support the disclosure of campaign contributions. What I'm talking about specifically is saying if you're in the legislature or if you're a government official, if you're a county or a city government official, and I want something done, I can't bribe you. I can't ask you to do something and then here's payment for it. But what I can do is say, Bob, you're a basketball fan, aren't you? How'd you like to go to the Final Four? I know you're a big basketball fan. There's nothing that I expect out of it. I just have a couple extra tickets. And of course, if you're a big basketball fan, you'll jump for joy and you'll say, yes, I can give you the tickets. I can give you a plane ticket to go to the Final Four, and you can go to the Final Four and have fun. Then I come back and I say, oh, Bob, by the way, I'm interested in this. Are you going to feel some sort of an obligation? There's no legal obligation. There isn't even any moral obligation. But I have extended more influence than the average person would be able to extend, and you have received a gratuity, a substantial gratuity for that effort.
Well, I look at that as, definitely a substantial gratuity, but I also look at campaign contributions, especially when they're made in force by special groups, by specific groups, to get certain things done. And we saw this happen during the healthcare exchange, when for a year before they were working on telling everybody how great this is going to be for the state. And all of a sudden, we see the campaigns start to get the inflows and the influx of money from Blue Cross and Blue Shield and from all of the insurance companies from the medical associations. Just about everybody who had an influence in the medical field was contributing. Well, most of the money was going to specific people who I would presume already had a tendency or a penchant for looking favorably on this healthcare exchange. And next thing you know, we have this big battle going on in the legislature, but eventually the guys who win are the ones who got all the campaign money.
Money makes a big difference. There's no question about it. At least those kind of influences are disclosable. At least they have to follow the law. They can only make a maximum contribution of $1,000 in a primary and $1,000 in a general. That's all fully disclosable. And yes, is there influence? Of course there's influence. But at least it's disclosable. At least the voters can make a valued judgment. Okay, this person received thousands of dollars from Blue Cross or Blue Shield or from Select Health or any of the other ones. The public knows that, and the public can make a determination based on what their knowledge is. However, the stuff I'm talking about is not necessarily disclosable.
Right. So how do we stop this?
Well, oddly enough, there was a piece of legislation that I participated in writing, introduced this year to stop this very practice. Because Idaho has a law that prohibits taking gratuities and taking anything of pecuniary benefit, but there's a big exception in that law. There has to be some sort of a quid pro quo for it to be illegal. In other words, you have to agree to do something and in return get paid for it. That's illegal.
That's a bribe.
That's a bribe. That's illegal. However, if you do not agree to something, if you just do it as if a person or an individual or a company just gives this to you as good faith, that's not a bribe. I introduced legislation, or I actually wrote legislation, and I had some friends of mine in the legislature introduce it this year. Again, 8 or 9 years ago as well. Same legislation. Couldn't get a hearing.
Wow. So you can see where the legislature stands. They don't want to really change the rules that could affect anything that has to do with them receiving funds.
It's not just funds, it's pecuniary benefits. I'll give you a good example. You may have heard of the Idaho Governor's Cup.
Yes, I have, and I understand that there are a few people well taken care of if they go up there. 16
legislators received a free ticket to go to the Idaho's Governor's Cup. Those tickets can cost anywhere from $2,000 to $5,000 per person. It's a really fancy event in Sun Valley. It's ostensibly, and it raises money for education purposes. They give scholarships to Idaho kids. However, 16 Idaho legislators, some corporation, either Monsanto or the yogurt maker in Twin Falls.
Right, Chobani.
In fact, Chobani bought a big ticket item. They were like a super sponsor, a gold sponsor or something.
Well, of course, we gave them $25 million to put their plant up.
Exactly, and that gives the appearance of corruption.
Well, it's not just the appearance of corruption. In my book, it is corruption. But you have to look at it from the viewpoint that most people don't know what goes on behind the scenes. And if they don't know, they need to know. And I'm glad that you're working on this, and I'm glad you're running for office.
This piece of legislation would prohibit that activity.
Well, I'm not sure where we're going to go with this, but isn't there a way to find out who paid for those tickets? Or is it not something that's available to the public?
Ostensibly, lobbyists are supposed to, if it's a lobbyist that buys the ticket, they're supposed to file it with the Secretary of State in their financial disclosure forms. Some of them do, some of them don't, I'm sure. But you go try and look through 165 or 200 financial disclosure forms that lobbyists file.
I do that.
You'll see, periodically, one of them that have bought a ticket to the Governor's Cup.
Right.
Other than that, it's not disclosable.
So if a corporation were to buy a group of tickets and not a lobbyist, that's not a disclosable item. Is that correct?
I don't think you'll see anywhere on any reports Chobani buying a gold ticket or whatever it was called and then giving two members of the legislature, two senior members of the legislature, and their wives a free pass. I don't think you'll find that disclosed anywhere.
All right, so I'm right that the corporations can buy them, and they do not have
And
the
they do.
disclosure. Right.
As far as I
Okay.
know, they don't.
Well, I'll tell you, that kind of opens my eyes. I think it's going to open a few people's eyes.
I hope so, and it's a practice that should be, and it's not just the. I mean, I mentioned the legislature because I'm more familiar with that, but this practice goes on all across the state of Idaho. 8 or 10 years ago, when I introduced it last time, the biggest pushback we got was from local government, county government, and city government, because these people they actually were open about it. Hey, this is my Christmas bonus. The garbage collector, the garbage company gives me a Christmas bonus.
Well, let me ask you a question. You were a legislator before,
Yes.
and that was many years ago. That was back in 1990s or 80s?
I had the privilege to be on the ballot with Ronald Reagan
Oh, wow.
in
Okay.
1984. He was on the ballot. I was on the ballot with him, and I won a big election. And he pulled out a lot of votes for us in 1984. Excuse me. And so I was in the legislature from 85 through 90. In 1990, I was actually the Senate Majority Leader. And yes.
So you're very familiar with
I'm very familiar with
what's happening.
And then I went out for a couple of years, and I actually ran for some higher offices. I was not successful at that. I went back in the Senate in 1995, actually, just for 1 year. But I was in the Senate in 1995. And oddly enough, that year, I introduced several pieces of legislation that is just not working the way it was supposed to work. I'll give you one. Constitutional Defense Fund. I introduced legislation to set up a Constitutional Defense Fund, specifically to use the money in that Constitutional Defense Fund to fight the federal government with their incursions into states' rights and to trying to force the states to do different things. You know, Governor Phil Batt signed it, and it's been law. It's been law since 1995. You know how many times it's actually been used for what it was initially intended?
Probably never.
Once.
Oh, okay. Once. I'm sorry.
Once. Governor Batt used it one time for the specific purpose of defending the state against the federal government. Ever since then, all they use it for is to pay legal fees if a certain piece of legislation is overturned.
Right.
If it's a certain type of legislation, the people that bring the suit are entitled to get their attorney fees back.
Well, let me ask you a question. You were back in the late 80s. You were in the mid 90s.
Right.
Do you see any difference now compared to then as far as how the legislature operates? Are they more forthright now or less forthright than they were then?
They are, in my estimation, they're less forthright and there's more centralized control. You mentioned earlier health exchange.
Right.
During that debate, a good friend of mine from another part of the state called me up and said, Rod, we have helped write 3 pieces of legislation. We have our representative from this part of the state. Can't get them, a member of the House, can't get them introduced. Would you go help her and see if this is one of those, a member of the House, would you go help this representative and see if you can't help her get the bills introduced? It was two statutes and 1 resolution. I said, sure. I went to talk to this representative. She says, these committee chairmen will not put this bill on the agenda, these bills on their agenda for printing. Just for printing. Not for even to be voted on the merits, just for printing. And I said, why is that? And she says, well, the Speaker of the House has sent down an edict that any bill that deals with a health exchange issue will not be introduced unless the Speaker of the House agrees with it, the Chairman of the House Health and Welfare Committee agrees with it, and Governor Otter. They didn't agree to any of these 3. It couldn't get introduced.
Huh.
None of the 3. Couldn't even be brought up on the merits. See, it was a competing piece of legislation that would have competed with what ultimately became law. So any discussion of these issues were locked down.
Wow. You know, it's amazing. I've been here for 23 years in Idaho, and I do remember a time back in the 90s, the mid-90s, early 90s. It wasn't so bad. I didn't find this to be any more of a corrupt type state than what I had been in before. And mind you, I came from New Jersey. But I did see the politics that went on because I lived up north and found it interesting that when I got down here and as time went on, it seems like the politics got more and more intense to the point where the government is now basically running the people. The people are no longer running the government, and I think it's time for change.
That's precisely, remember, how we started this conversation.
Right.
One of the reasons that the United States of America is an exceptional nation is because we set up a government that was run by the people.
Right.
The people were in charge. And it's becoming more and more where the government wants to be more and more in charge, and instead of the government being the servants of the people, a lot of people are just asking for the reverse of that, and that's just not right. And that's what I'd like to try and get changed to see if we can turn that corner a little bit and set it back to where the people are more in charge and the government is not.
Well, I wish you a lot of luck. We'll be pulling for you.
Thank you.
And I look forward to seeing you on the campaign trail.
Thank you. I'll definitely be out there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Idaho.